Good evening, and Afreilige Yemra Hilula, to be careful not to say what day of the Omein it is, because I want to say a brocho presently. So let's go into our shilas. First one is, we had recently, I think it was 2 weeks ago, we had a discussion. I'm putting on Tefilin, and whilst doing so, I've said a brocha, and someone next to me is also putting on Tefilin, and he says also a brocha. Is my answering Omein to his bracha a hefsek during my hanochas tefillin, between the bracha and the shalosh, etc. So we went through this, and Reb Akiva Eiger, I saw Mr. Brewer, he takes the stricter view, following Reb Akiva Eiger, which I'd like to share with you. It's a very verstandig argument, and he says the following. So we have on the one side the ponim me'iros, says that you can answer Omein to someone else's bracha, because after all, you are affirming mitzvahs l'haniach tefillin, so that's not a hefsek. Dvar Shmuel says you shouldn't answer because, I guess, because it's not your bracha, it's someone else's, therefore it becomes a hefsek. So he shows that we've got two interesting sources. One is when it comes to haboicha be'amo Yisrael be'avo. So there's a discussion, should we answer Omein to Habecha B'Am Yisrael Be'ave, and Chabad minig is to fall silent. The Chazan says Baruch Atah Hashem, Be'ebeche, and doesn't finish off the bracha aloud, so as to avoid the answering of Omein. And the argument being that the bracha is like a bracha on the Shema, and the answering of Omein to the Chazan's Be'ech B'Am Yisrael Be'ave would be a hefsek between your bracha of Avasalam and the Shema. Oh, but it's, if you, according to the Ponim Me'iros, you're answering Omein on the identical bracha which you're saying, so there shouldn't be a hefsek. And there they give a psateret that it's no worse than Shelas Sholem. Lepoil, actually, we are careful about this. We don't answer Omein to Avos to the bracha Bech Bam Yisrael Be'ava because of a chashash hefsek. Even more is when it comes to the Omein for Goal Yisrael by Shemoneh Esrei, just before Shemoneh Esrei. So there the Alter Rebbe says we should finish off Goal Yisrael synchronized with the Chazan, so that not to have to answer Omein to Goal Yisrael of the Chazan, which would be a hefsek, ben Gola the Tefillah between Shemoneh Esrei, between the Goal Yisrael and Shemoneh Esrei. So we've got here two very strong proofs that Omein on the same bracha, which you are sensitive, which you are engaged with, it's still considered a hefsek, because possibly because it's not your bracha, it's their bracha. However, so Reb Akiva Eiger does not, he doesn't undo the proof. He doesn't give a logic, because the logic of the is that the Panorama says a lot of logic. It says it's the same thing, and yet you have here two proofs to the contrary. So okay. So I guess we should be avoiding answering Amen until we find an answer to Reb Akiva Eiger's kashas. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next question, and that is about putting up a mezuzah at someone's house, and they are wheelchair bound, and therefore they're incapable of putting up the mezuzah. Very happy that I'm come round to put up their mezuzah. They're sitting there, and the person says, could I say the bracha and you do the banging? So here it's a question of Baal HaMitzvah, the owner of the mitzvah, and the poyel HaMitzvah, who's implementing the mitzvah. So can the owner of the mitzvah retain the bracha even though the implementation is being done by someone else? Now, this came up, it's not a fresh question. We were learning in Gemara, a slightly different, we're learning Gemara Rosh Hashanah, talking about if I come to someone's house and they are incapable of saying brachas, so they have to do a mitzvah, so I'm allowed to blow shofar for them, and I break the bracha, the Shema Kel shofar, and they say Amen, and that's okay. The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah is discussing if they don't know how to say the brocha on the matzah. Can I come along to their house and say two brochas? Lahkniso haaretz and halachilas matzah. Because I cannot make a brocha. You want to eat an apple, I cannot make a haaretz for you. Because there's no arvis. Arvis means I'm responsible. You have to hear him as a shofar. I have a mitzvah to make sure that you can hear shofar. So therefore I can say a brocha on your shofar. Yeah, on your mitzvah of shofar. But I have no mitzvah to ensure that you can eat an apple. Therefore, you want to eat an apple, but I don't have a chrais, I don't response, I don't have arvis. So the Gemara there says, what happens if the fellow wants to eat matzah as a mitzvah? Can I make the brocha as well as the brocha alachilas matzah? So what you're seeing there is that the volunteer comes to their houses. He's saying a brocha and someone else is doing the mitzvah. So that's legitimate. So here we want to do the same thing here. But it's a little bit different. Because in the case of the matzah, it's the volunteer who's saying the bracha, and it's the owner who's doing the mitzvah. In our case, it's the other way around. It's the volunteer who's doing the mitzvah, and it's the owner who wants to say the bracha. So it's the opposite way around. So that's the dilemma. So we've gone through this. If you've been keeping track with our shiurim, we had the story of the Jewish prisoner, and there's a shliach visiting him on Hanukkah, and there's a glass wall in the visitation room dividing between the rabbi and the prisoner. And the rabbi managed to get permission to light a menorah on his side of the wall, and the prisoner is asking, could he at least make the brocha on the menorah which is for him? So this is the question, the same story as the Mezuza. As the person in the wheelchair, unable to reach the door, can the owner of the mitzvah say a bracha on the action which is being done by a volunteer? So you have on the screen we have from the Ben Ish Chai, where he does allow this, a person who's bedridden, who cannot reach the menorah. You shouldn't bring the menorah to him because it's not the right place. And he says the patient could stay in bed and say the bracha on the menorah, which is going to be lit by someone else. So he says the owner of the mitzvah can make the bracha on the action done by a volunteer. Now, in the case of the Mezuza, I've mentioned several times, the Sefer Seichel Tov, and he brings this from the Ben Ish Chai, and the Ben Ish Chai, I think, also addresses clearly the case of Mezuza. But then we have the question, with Milo, why is there a nusach? You look in the Rambam, he has, if a father, if Moyel says, al hamilo. If it's the father, it would be the bracha lomol es haben. Ashkenazim don't make the difference, but the Rambam makes that difference. So, all right, so now there's a father, he can't do the bris himself. So he's appointed a shliach. Why shouldn't the father say, lomol es haben, and the moyel gets on with it? If I can make a bracha and you're banging the mezuzah on my doorpost, so I should make a bracha and you're doing the bris on my son. So why is there two nuschos? So this is one of the strong proofs that when you have an owner of a mitzvah who's delegated the mitzvah to another person, that the other person, the one who's doing the mitzvah, should say the bracha, not the owner of the mitzvah. Those are one of the primary proofs which is brought against the Ben Ish Chai. I'm not totally sure about this because possibly the mitzvah done by the father, lomol es haben, is not being done by the moyel. I think the Shach says this. There's a mitzvah that your son has to have a bris. That is being done. But the mitzvah that you should circumcise your son, that is not being done by a shliach. That there's a certain relationship which he doesn't have. And you can't, the famous ksos, can I make a shliach to put on tefillin? Says, yeah, sure, but it's on his head. I can make a shliach for an action. I cannot make a shliach for it's my head. That I cannot delegate my head. And I know when anyone would want it, but never mind. There's no the shlichus doesn't apply here. Shlichus is for an activity, not for a passive for a state of being. So I can make you a shliach to put on tefillin, but the passive state, it's in my head. That's not an action. That's a passive state that I cannot delegate to a shliach. So if you say there's a mitzvah to make a bris for your son, so possibly that doesn't really get included. And all right, that's why a lot of people attack a mahader if they are capable. They'll do at least the chituch because there's a svar, then the proper shlichus here. There's a shlichus for the one part of the mitzvah, not for the other part of the mitzvah. Having said that, so therefore it could be that's why there's a loshon of the when the moil does it's alamilo. When the father does it, it's lamul saben. It's a different. It's another angle of the mitzvah which is not delegated. Which now brings us to actually in the Gemara Rosh Hashanah we have at the back of the Gemara you got the Rif, and on the margin of the Rif you've got the Shiltei HaGibayim from Yeshua Boyaz, lived about 400 years ago, perhaps. And he quotes, it's like, in other words, like short comments on the Rif. One of his very common sources is the Riaz. So you may have heard the name of the Rid, who was a Shia de Tirani. Tirani is somewhere in Italy. Don't ask me the coordinates. And he had a grandson, also called Rabbi Shia. I don't know whether they knew one another, but the grandson also lived in Tirani, and is known as the Reb Shaya Achren Zal, and therefore, in short, the Riaz. So the Riaz is quoted in the Shiltei HaGibayim, and he says, although you can delegate, you can make a brocha when you can make a brocha, someone else is doing a mitzvah. They don't know how to say the brocha. You can say the brocha for them. But he says, She'ena yochel levorech milas al milas beno lecha al chaveiroi al milas beno להכניסו bris. Like someone's doing a bris, and then he doesn't know how to say the brachas. So can I say for him להכניסו bris shel Avraham Avinu? So he says he can't delegate that because he doesn't. He says you're not mechuyev in this milo, therefore you can't delegate. It's in Santa Chiddush. Meanwhile, so this is my discussion here about delegating. So to summarize that point, can you delegate? Can you delegate the action and keep the bracha? That's the question. As I say, Ben Ish Chai says yes. And in that case, the fellow behind the glass in the prison could say a bracha. Others disagree with it, and obviously it's not so clear. Now, we're talking about the mitzvah of bris milah and the bracha, and so here we saw that you can't delegate the bracha להכניסו. What happens if the father is not present? So here you have the Rambam, and he says if there's no father, the bracha להכניסו is missed out. Yesh mishahoyer, there are those who have said that you should say it. Who? Bezdin, Echad min ha'om, one of the people, one of the people present. Ein roy lasses came. The Rambam is quite strict in the yonim of brochas. For example, the women, according to the Rambam, can't make a broch on shofar and lulav and sukkah, etc. Okay, the Rambam says no. However, look on the bottom left. We have here from the Ramor in Simonei Samachin Hilchos Milah. If the father is not present, so then yes, and the logic to that is you say it's not my business. There's a duty on the collective. The collective Klal Yisrael have a duty to have this child have a bris. So when I'm doing this, and I'm using the word collective, Bezdin is responsible to implement the responsibilities of the collective. Does that make sense? There's a mitzvah on Klal Yisrael But who's going to implement it? So you've got the judiciary, the Bezdin. It's their duty to get it happen. That doesn't mean that the fellow, the sandik, it says the Poil says that it's the sandik would say the brocha in such a case. It doesn't mean the sandik has to have a special settle from Bezdin. It means that he's there, and on behalf of Klal Yisrael, he'll say that we have a collective mitzvah להכניסו bris shel Avraham Avinu. Okay, in the notes, I commented, what about a case of a bar mitzvah? Does the if there's no father, what happens to the brocha Shep-Torani? So the brocha Shep-Torani is actually not recorded in the Gemara, and that's the reason why we don't say the brocha with Hashem's name. We say just Baruch Shep-Torani mi'onesh haloseh, although there are those who say it with it, but that's our minig, below Shem Malchus. So now, if there's no father, should the mother say it? So this is what's written in the Piskei Teshuvos. The mother wouldn't be saying this because he doesn't go into the explanation. By contrast, I was surprised to see, and the practicalities are interesting, because normally it's said by the Sifrei-Torah, and normally the mother would be behind the Mezuza. So it's rather impractical. But in those communities where a woman just says Birchas HaGoimel, perhaps to say Birchas Torani also. Okay. Meanwhile, the Nitei Gavriel does write that the mother should say the bracha. And then in note Lamed Aleph, he brings here from a commentary on the Rambam, Leiv Mavin. I apologize, I didn't look up these Meforshim, also Pesach Advir. And he says the mother she's got the duty of the chinuch of her children. So I found that a little bit surprising, because generally we say the mitzvah of chinuch is on the father. He's saying that the mother has a chiyuv. Now, I went through this yesterday. As you know, I do a rehearsal in Hebrew on the Wednesday night, and someone pointed out actually that one of the participants, that in the Sikha of Emor, Parshas Shavua, in Tov Shin Nun, the Mugadik Sikha, and if you have the Sefer Siches or the Israel Duyos, you'll see that the Rebbe goes in at length to explain how the mitzvah, the mother does have a mitzvah of chinuch. So although I didn't go through all the technicalities, but he quotes from the Shalom that there's a mitzvah that the mother does have a mitzvah of chinuch, and all right, and the Rebbe brings from, I think, from the Shalom, that the majority of the chinuch is actually done by the mother rather than the father. In addition, the mother's approach for chinuch being through avo is something which is much more effective nowadays than the chinuch, which would be perhaps in a more rigid way. I mentioned last night, which I remember Sikha, that was before I looked up the Sikha in Tov Shin Nun, the Rebbe had commented on this, about does a mother have a chiyuv of chinuch? And it was like, as if to say, one fine day, there's a big meeting of Rabbonim, and they make a new takana. They make a takana that the father has a chiyuv of chinuch. Till then, the father didn't have a chiyuv, and now, you should know, Rabbi Yisai, from now on, you have a chiyuv of chinuch. Wonderful. Imagine if they make that such an announcement, and to all the ladies they say, Choshev ladies, you should know from now on you have a chiyuv to be mechanech your children. It would be a joke. It would be a laughing stock. That's their whole raison d'etre has been the whole time. They've been meser nefesh, and all their energies in being mechanech their children, to come along and say, oh, we have now Chachamim made a takana that the mother has to be mechanech the children. It didn't need to be made. That was the approach then. Okay, so I just see here that there's two shittas about this, and certainly the mother does have a privilege of chinuch. To say that she has a chiyuv, okay, to say that therefore she should say Shep-Torani mi'onesh haloseh, that's a technical question. Anyway, and even after the Rebbe says that she has a mitzvah, to say that therefore she's got a punishment for etc. That's questionable. Okay, let's go on to the next question, and that is a very contemporary type of question. Many products now come along with a QR code, and when we open packages on Shabbos, so we're careful not to tear through the writing. So I was asked this question: do I have to be careful to avoid cutting and tearing through the QR code? Is QR code considered writing? It's a very interesting question. What in my mind, a QR code doesn't say anything. It is it enables you to use a camera of some sort to read it, and of course you get information out of it, but it's unintelligible as it is. So is a script which is unintelligible, but it is usable. It can be developed through the appropriate tools. Is that considered writing? So the closest we have is a fascinating thing in Yerushalmi. Talks about people who had a certain trick up their sleeves. If I wanted to convey to you a secret message, so I would write it on a piece of parchment, papyrus, whatever. I'd write it with gall nut juice. And if that's the wrong thing, doesn't matter. It was some kind of invisible ink. And it dries, there's no trace. Then the recipient receives it and then pours ink over it. And then you can see where the ink is more absorbed, less absorbed, and you can read the message. So says the Gemara, Reb Yochanan and Rish Lakish both agree that that's equivalent to ksav al gabi sikra, to writing with black ink on top of red ink, v'chayiv, and you'd be punishable for writing. This is not what the Gemara says, but let's say if I would take a wax candle and write with a white wax candle on a piece of paper, write something, and then you'd pour some watercolor paint. So where the wax candles, so before you couldn't see the writing, now the writing has become visible because you've put stuff around it, and something similar has happened over here. So the one who pours the ink over the invisible ink and now has developed the secret message is chayev. What about the one who did the first part? So this is from the Piskei Tshuva, as you can see. He asks, what about the one who did the first invisible writing? Is he considered having written? So Rav Falk, Zechreinu Livracha, he has a lot of discussion about this, and he says, look at the Gemara. It said that the one who pours the ink on top of the invisible ink, here on the top of this gallnut juice, it's like writing with black ink on top of red ink. Oh, that means the first one is also liable. He says it's ksav al gabi sikra. So if I'd written the first one did with sikra, the second one we did with black ink. All right, so that means that both of them are chayev. That's what Rav Falk learned from this Gemara, which is, I think, quite convincing. Okay, so if you write characters with invisible ink, then that would be considered writing, according to, yeah. That might tell you that if you put in place the ability to develop a message, is considered writings, and then you would say the QR code is also writing. I don't necessarily buy that all the way, because with the Me'afotzim he wrote letters and words. He wrote a message. Of course, it's not visible. Let's say you used to write if you write with lemon juice, and then you put it by the heater, so then the lemon juice will now turn brown. So you see, but the writing is there. With the QR code, it's one step more removed. There's no writing there at all. There is a way that you could develop it. It's like you'd have, let's say, That was one. And you'd have a tape recorder. Tape recording. You had Hashem's name on a tape recording, and then someone wants to erase the tape. Is it called erasing Hashem's name? And I believe the general approach was no, it's not, because a tape recording is not writing. And or even though you can develop from it a message, but it's not considered writing. So I wouldn't, if it were a Suderaisa, I would certainly be more careful. Here we're talking about not making the QR code, we're talking about tearing through it. And what is here? Moichik. Moichik min ha-Torah is only if it's moichik amanas lichtov. If you're erasing with the intention to use the space to write a new message. Moichik shloi amanas lichtov. Tearing through letters is clearly an issur d'Rabbanan. And therefore, I think here, because we have enough room for doubt whether this is called writing or not, one could take the policy of Sveika d'Rabbanan l'Kula, and therefore not to have to worry about tearing through the QR code. Someone put a message here in the... Right. Let's move on. Okay. So one of the Chabad shuls here in London had a very choshev visitor, and he was a prime Talmud of the late Rav Soloveitchik from YU, from Reb Akiva Eiger, and he asked, what is Chabad minig by Hoshanos? So the minig is, we have the procession around the bima. Before that, someone takes out a Sifrei-Torah and stands at the bima in the center, and Yom Shana Rabbah, several Sifrei-Torah, takes out the Sifrei-Torah, and then at the end of Hoshanos, everyone's done their circuits, and then the Sifrei-Torah is brought back. In Chabad, we'll start singing Hashia Samecha, okay? And then the Sifrei-Torah is put back in the Oron, and then everyone says, L'ban das kol ami ha'oretz ki Hashem hu elikim ein oid. Yeah? So he asked whether that's indeed Chabad minig too. Says, yeah, more or less. And the local shliach Rov showed him in my siddur, quoting this from Oisem and Hage Chabad, etc., that's indeed our minig. What's the reason for this minhag of putting back the Sifrei-Torah and saying למען הארץ homeowner, it's only thereafter? So this person had said that because till now Hoshanos has got at this point we're sending a message to the Amei Ha'aretz, למען das, all the nation of the world. The Torah has nothing to do with them. It's a message to Amei Ha'aretz, but not Torah. And therefore, we close the Oron Kodesh and we say למען das kol Amei Ha'aretz. Put the Sifrei-Torah back, close the Oron Kodesh, and then we say למען das kol Amei Ha'aretz. All right, that sounded very interesting, and obviously someone like myself was intrigued to trace this a little bit further, and I would not be able to find this on Shabbos. I found here the Sefer HaRekeach. So Rekeach is from the early Baalei HaTosfos, or by that period, and he has in the Sefer HaRekeach HaGadol, he has the Minhagim, and he now talks about the Shana Rabbah, and talking about taking out 7 Sifrei-Torah, and with each one do a shyness. I'm mixing up. There are those who say after each hakofa to put one Sifrei-Torah back, but that's not the general minig. All the Sifrei-Torah are kept out until the end, and then all the Sifrei-Torah put back. But then he says, "Va'achakach machzirin ha'toras lemekayman, ve'oimdin lifnei Oron HaKodesh pasuach, ve'oimdin l'man v'kol rom l'man das v'achakach kadosh." So one slight change from what this eminent Talmud Chacham was saying. He says, Dafka the Oron Kodesh is left open, and only after the postuk is finished, then we close the Oron Kodesh. So this business of isolating the Leman Das from Umesh Ha'olam doesn't fit. Why do you have to leave the Oron Kodesh open? What is the Hesber? I don't know. And I looked around in several sources. There's a sefer called Hoshanos, various commentaries. This whole minhag is not very well recorded. So it's very interesting. This you're talking about for 600, 700 years ago, and we're doing exactly the same thing, and it's hardly recorded anywhere. In the Sifrei Haminhogim, the Kutei Mariach, etc. Yosef, I looked, I couldn't find it. So this is an appeal. Anyone out there? Perhaps anyone's got the Hoshanos book by Art Scroll. They might have some comment over there, and I'll be grateful for some further insight. Right. We also say these psukim by Shir Shel Yoim, and that's really, in a sense, after davening, we're going away from shul out into the street. And so we have those psukim, Beis Yaakov L'chuvanecha Bar Hashem Ki Kol Ha'am Yechish V'Shem Lekov. It's something to, and that's the Olenu L'Shabeach also. Before we go out to the street, to emphasize, to internalize that we're different. And so also that's the preliminary to Shir Shel Yoim, especially in Nusach Ashkenaz, which was said after Oleinu, is in the mindset you're about to go out to the street, and to emphasize למען הארץ, perhaps. But we hear that before it says, we have a closeness to Hashem. למען הארץ is different. So, okay, I say this because people ask the question, when we say Shir Shel Yoim on how's it on Rosh Chodesh? I don't remember. On Shir Shel Yoim, when we on Tisha B'Av, on the afternoon. So we started with Shir Shel Yoim. Do you say Beis Yaakov? And my feeling is that you don't, because the Beis Yaakov is when you're gearing up to leave the shul. Here you just come back to shul in the afternoon, and so you say Shir Shel Yoim, but you don't say Beis Yaakov. Okay. All of these points are in the Siddur, written in the beloved place. Now, here we have something very interesting. So, I got this question yesterday, and is asking why in the Siddur did I not point out the difference that in many Siddurim it has so take a look over here. So he was asking, why did I not comment on that? So the answer is that I was looking at the Alter Rebbe, and I was looking at the Alter Rebbe's sources. I wasn't really focusing on latest for him. And I wasn't aware of this difference. So I'm looking only, I'm trying to trace the Alter Rebbe's sources. And so meanwhile, this whole piece became very, very interesting. In the Siddur, before the Alter Rebbe, you have the Shalosh Siddur, which was published Tov Kuf Beis, 3 years before the Alter Rebbe is born. We have the Reb Akiva Eiger Siddur, printed the same year the Alter Rebbe is born. They do not have this piece of Mizos Olam in Hamidbar and the Yehirotzen. That piece is not there. It's not in the Kitzur Shaloh, which was published 50 years earlier. And so in earlier sources, I couldn't, and this whole piece is not there. The earliest source I came across is in a sefer published in the year Tov Kuf Yud Beis, when the Alter Rebbe is 7 years old, called Birkas HaChodesh. It's a small kuntras. I saw this. How do I get to it? In the Siddur, the Bear Siddur, called Avodas Yisrael. So there he says, the detail, he says he saw this in Birkas HaChodesh. Oh, so I looked up at this Birkas HaChodesh. So this whole paragraph is not in the earlier Siddurim. It's only in the 50 years before the Alter Rebbe publishes his Siddur, approximately, where this comes up. If any of you know of a sefer called Chemdas Yomim, I looked up there also, and it's not there. So it's something which was really clearly introduced closer to the Alter Rebbe's times. So now we have in this prayer, after we have this posuk, and then we have V'hirotzi milfonecho lemalis pegimas halvono, that the indentation, the reduction of the levana in size should be filled in. It shouldn't be diminished. We have hoyo oir halvono k'erachamo. The light of the moon should be like the light of the sun. K'oir shivas yemei bereishis, like the light of the 7 days of Bereishis. And so, as you see in a moment, that in later Sidurim, after the Alter Rebbe, you have a Vov added here, Uka Eiracham. So that's what I'm trying to explore. And this is based on the Pasuk in Yeshaya, which we'll see presently. Now, this afternoon, I went into a Beis Medrash. I was looking up. I wanted to actually see the newest edition of the Rekeach. And I wanted to see whether there's any cross references on the previous quote, and they had no other cross references. Such a thing I would have expected would be in other Sifrei HaMenhagim, no mention at all. But meanwhile, I saw a sefer on Birkat Kiddush Levana. I was looking the shelves till I found the right sefer. So I saw that one of the, I think it says there, Rosh Hashanah, I believe, Reb Moshe Soloveitchik did not want to say this piece, Lemalis Pimas Halvana, because if the Levana is going to be filled in, that means we're not going to be able to do a calendar anymore. Our whole calendar is contingent upon a moon, which is waxing and waning, and then we have a mitzvah Kiddush HaChodesh, and then we have a mitzvah Ibur Hashona, because the cycle of the moon is different to the cycle of the sun, and therefore we have a whole calendar. The malas Pegimas Halavona, then the mitzvah is going to be obsolete. So he didn't want to say this piece because it's praying for mitzvah to become obsolete. Okay. Right, fine. So now what you have on the screen is the following. The top one is from Reb Akiva Eiger Siddur, as you can see, Siddur Amudei Shamayim, Amudei V'shar Shamayim, Reb Akiva Eiger. So his Birkas Halavona finishes off with the Omar, but that's the Tona Dveli or Rabbi Shmuel, Hilkach Nemrina Mu'umet. That's the end. And you see there's a Kaddish there. That's it. Then one of the Sidurim closer to the Alter Rebbe's times, I mentioned it before, Reb Zalman Hena, or Hana, however you pronounce his name, and he publishes a Siddur. This is published in Tov Kuf Lamed Zayin, published in Prague. And he does have, now he says you should shake the begod, the hem of your clothes to get rid of the clippers, and then you should say Ve'yomer, yeah? In the Alter Rebbe Siddur, V'yinashil Begodav comes afterwards, yeah? But by him, I guess, he had been Makabel from earlier, and they had stopped there. So that was Yinashil Begodav. But then there's a new thing which has been added, so he adds it in. And he has now the Malas Pigim B'Salvono, V'yayavono Ka'erchamo, Ka'eshivas Yemei Bereishis. So he brings this tefillah, and you see it's Ka'er Hacham or Ka'er Shivas Yomim, without the Vav. The third quote, the third copy, is from as I mentioned before, the Avodas Yisrael, from it's a Yekish Siddur. It's got two nusach. You've got nusach Pola, nusach Ashkenaz, but the diktuk is pretty much the same. And there you have the Vav is added. So we want to look at that. So now let's take a look. We have here, here's the pasuk in Yeshaya. That there will be a time where the light of the moon will be like the light of the sun. The light of the sun will be sevenfold, like the light of the 7 days. Now, here's the question. When does this moon become the light like the sun, and the sun leapfrogs to become sevenfold? Or does it mean that the moon will be like the sun, And you know about the sun. The sun will be not like it is now. The sun will be so if you take that approach, then there's no need, I think, for the Vov. The Or Halvono Ka'or Hachamo, which the Or Hachamo will be Ka'or Shivas Mebreshis. There's no need for the Vov there. And so someone at some stage, as they say, it's after the Alter Rebbe's times, somewhere in the Tov Reish Chofs or somewhere around then, sometime after the Alter Rebbe, someone introduces a change, and this became very popular in so many other Sidurim, but it's certainly not in the earlier sources. And okay, uh, as you see, I'm intrigued. And so now I look up Meforshim on the Pasuk of Yeshaya, and I pulled out also the Eir HaTeireh. Because the Pasuk of in my mind comes up often in Chassidus, and therefore I was curious to see what the Tzemach Tzedek has in Eir HaTeireh on Yeshaya. So in this is in there's 3 volumes of Eir HaTeireh and Nevi'im Ksuvim, and the first one has a long several pages on this. V'zeleshon haklipos. The klipos is a commentary on the Nach, and from Reb Shmuel Laniado, and I've noted that it was published in Venice, Tov Yud Zayin. Okay, so the Tzemach Tzedek is writing over. I found the actual klipos also on the computer, but it's easier to read from the Tzemach Tzedek. So now he writes that these psukim are referring to Le'osid, that the world will be perfected as it was in the time of creation, and therefore the sun, the moon, and the sun will be the same size, as we know at the beginning of creation. So, like this moon was the same size as the sun before its complaint and it was diminished, so it will be Le'osid. And therefore, the meaning of the pasuk is that the year that shiur Or Hachamo Umimenu Novin. And now it's telling us how big the sun will be, and from this we'll understand also the size of the moon. Because the moon and the sun will be of equal size. Okay, so therefore, having seen all of this, I see that there's no need to have the extra Vov. If they thought that there's perhaps the one who added the Vov was understood that the moon will be like the sun is now, and the sun will be, I don't know, perhaps that's what they understood. I don't know, but I don't see the need to start tampering with it. One last point, and I mentioned before this Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, who was a bit concerned about mitzvahs kiddush hachodesh, etc. And indeed, the Rebbe also speaks about this in Tov Shin Mem Daled, and he refers to this pasuk of Oy Oil Vonke Alchamo. And so then, how will be the whole inyan of the Rebbe? He says that the whole inyan of the need to make Ibur Hashana also will fall away. The reason why we have the moon is a smaller body, and therefore it has a smaller cycle. The sun is a bigger cycle, a bigger body has a bigger cycle. This is the way I understand what the Rebbe is saying. Once the moon has got the same size as the sun, it will have the same size cycle also. And therefore, there will be no need to have a Ibur Hashana to kind of match up the lunar year to the solar year, because both bodies will have the same speed, the same I don't know, similar orbit, etc. So not only so the question is also what's the Kiddush Levana? There is no waxing or waning. So the Rebbe talks about this, and he says possibly this is talking about the later Tkufa, and this is a recurrent theme in the way the Rebbe resolves many questions about prophecies about the time of the Geula, and to say that there's 2 periods. There's an earlier period where Olam Kiminhogi Noiheg, and then there's a later period where things are in a totally unnatural form. And therefore, this would apply in the later period. To answer the Moshe Soloveitchik's question, then, there's a whole discussion about whether you bury a person with a kosher tzitzis or not. And there's a whole discussion about mitzvahs betelis losud lovei. And the Rebbe has this fascinating sikha, which was published, mamish, in the last years. And that was that, what does it mean? The Eibishter wants mitzvahs. So what does it mean? There's going to come a time he's going to change his mind? No more mitzvahs? What's the pshat? And especially if you talk about mitzvahs being Ramachiv and Demalko, Shasagi, and if so, I mean, the Eibishter is going to chas v'shalom change. What does it mean? And the Rebbe's approach there is that the mitzvahs will be happening. We don't have to worry about it. The mitzvahs will happen, whether you like it or not. It's going to happen, and therefore you don't have to worry about it. Whether you're burying with tzitzis or without tzitzis, it's going to happen. And so, what the Rebbe is saying, at the moment we have a choice whether to do mitzvahs or not, and the Yemos Mashiach, I guess, also to some degree, in the later period, the mitzvahs will be happening, regardless. We don't need to. There won't be a bechira, and there won't be a need for a bechira because the Eibishter's Rotz is going to be happening. On that basis, I think we can say we can also still daven lemalis begimas halvona, and because there's two stages. There's a phase of takia kiyama mitzvahs. What will happen then? Like you tear off the tzitzis from the shatachrichim, you can also daven for lemalis begimas halvona. Right. Where are we holding now? So that was that. Oh, I'm going backwards. Okay. What else do we have? Right, that's a piece of Zohar on this in your inyan of but I think I'm just going to go further. I thought because it's like Baymet, should have said that. Yeah, I thought that because of the Yom Elul, perhaps we should learn a piece of the Zohar, but it's not such an easy piece to learn. Okay, now a couple of things left. One is, someone asked me, the same fellow asked me about the Oishiv Yomim, asked me, he noticed in Chabad sometimes by Fabrengen, people will use the same cup for Kiddush without rinsing it in between. Now, in the dinim of Kos Brocho, which we discussed last week, one of them is that it should be shotuf, it should be rinsed. And we are very particular that before making Kiddush, and we saw that Rebbe was very particular to rinse the cup, and the Rebbe would also take a tissue and wipe it inside and the outside. So there's an inyan of rinsing the cup before Kiddush. So now if you use someone else's cup, is there an issue? Now, so this is, what you have on the screen is not from Siman Kuf Pei Gimel, which is Kesher Brocha, but it's from Siman Kuf Ayin, Derech Eretz Besuda, etc. And it says you should not drink from a cup and giving it to someone else to drink from, Mipnei Sakonos Nefashos. And I'm thinking a lot of us are concerned about germs, etc., and so we wouldn't. I must share this with you. First time I was in Russia, if you wanted to have a drink on the trip, there were these dispensers. They didn't have disposable cups. They had a bunch of glasses, and you went along and used a glass. And the next guy used the glass. You just use the same glasses as the other person. I guess it's one way for population control, but never mind. So now, in the Piskei Teshuvos, he mentions here, by Kiddush, it's customary drink from a cup, and then we give someone else to drink from the cup also. So it looks like we're not so concerned about this sharing a cup. And of particularly which I sent the question out, we have here a story which the Frierdiker Rebbe says, and you can see it's Topret Tzadik Zayin, I think it was Pesach. He says the following. Frierdiker Rebbe saying, there was one time a Chassidus Fabrengen, and my father was present. And one Chassid was given a cup which another person had drunk from. And the recipient took the cup and rinsed it out. And only then did he drink from it. My father, the Rebbe Rashab, was upset about this. And it was then he said the Maimah Hecholzer, which was said, Simchas Torah Tafresh Nontes. As you all know, the Sefer Maimah Hecholzer is all about the lack of dealing with strife and lack of Avos Yisrael. And he's saying here that this was triggered by witnessing how possibly it was more detail, personal detail. But this chassid had aversion to drink from the cup which the other chassid had drunk from. So here's like become very interesting that whilst you have in Shulchan Aruch that you shouldn't be sharing cups, so to speak, and yet there seems to be a chassidish flexibility on that. What else do we have here? Okay, last week we had a long discussion about saying Mishaberach for the maftir, for the one who has maftir, and I told you last week I looked all around, and as the famous Lashon, Yagata v'loy motzoso al tamin. So I can say the same thing. I looked everywhere, but I did not look in the Sefer Shari Ephraim, which is the classical Sefer on Kriyas HaTorah. So you can see here in the Shari Ephraim, Shar Tes, Seif Tes, where he says, after the maftir has been read, then you say, then you give a Meshaberach for the maftir. So he says very clearly that the Meshaberach is done for the Oilel Maftir between the maftir and the haftarah. So whereas last week we had a discussion about Birchas HaGoimel, so Birchas HaGoimel is not such a standard thing, that's not every week, etc. Therefore there's still room for that question. But when it comes to Mishaberach, so the Gaboim who do this every week, they're doing the right thing, they do the Mishaberach between. Okay, almost finished. And right, I'm holding. Get that tool. Sorry about that. Right, almost finished. Then we had, if you remember, I told you that I looked up in the Sicha from Tov Shin Chav Gimel, and he gives a reference about Birchas HaGoimel to Sifrei-Torah Chaim. If you remember, I said that I found there was about 23 volumes on the same title of Torah Chaim. So I wrote to the editor and says, which Torah Chaim was it? It says, no, it's Toy Das Chaim. And so it's a sefer on Birchas HaGoimel, which is the Birchas HaHodah of thanksgiving. And Chaim obviously stands for the V'chol HaChaim, V'chol Yam Yisur Midbar. So there's a whole sefer dedicated to the brocho of Birchas HaGoimel. And there he has, and then the reference gives us to the following in Sefer Torah Chaim, that when it comes to Goimel, and you are the last of the that reading, so Yesh Mevorchen Koidam Yesh HaKadosh, and there are those who say it after the Kaddish, so that's what the Rebbe in Tov Shin Chav Gimel promoted, that Birchas HaGoimel should be said after Kaddish. Okay, what else do we have here? We have also about, so last Friday night, that's the, I review some of the points which we say here. And last Friday night, I said over about the adding water to the wine, which I haven't seen. So Rabbi Yosef Lander says that what I'm talking about is his Zayda and his father, they would make a point of adding water to the wine, but that because they had wine which had no water added to it. But our wine has got wine added already, so therefore we don't bother with adding water to the wine. Okay, fine. Good to know. How do you know what's going on? I mean, everyone's in his houses, but most of our wines is commercial wines, and a bit of water has been added in the process. Finally, this is about, we had last week a discussion about the seder of taking off the tefillin. And meanwhile, I became then intrigued, when we put on the tefillin, why do we have this interesting seder? We put on our arm till the wrist, till the hand, then we stop there, we put on the shalrosh, then we go back to the hand, we do the last 3 rings around the finger, then we go back to tuck it in. So I was intrigued, what's the reason for that? So in Shulchan Aruch I couldn't find it. So here you see the Alter Rebbe does say it in the Siddur, but the Shulchan Aruch doesn't say this clearly. But look here, this is the Shulchan Aruch, Simcha Fei, Sifrei Yud Aleph. Acha shekosha sheyad al zroya. You already tagged the shel yad on there. You should put the shel rosh on. Koidim sheyichrech harasu sviv Hazroya. Put on the shalosh right away before you start wrapping around your arm. Put on the shiur, just it's firm on your arm. Put on the shalosh right away. Says the Mogen Avraham that from the Arizal we have that the Arizal would wrap around the arm before putting on the shalosh because he saw the wrapping around the arm being the part of the mitzvah. And he did it standing. Okay. So meanwhile we have here from the Arizal to do the 7 circuits around the arm before the shalosh. And the way it comes in Shulchan Aruch is the following. In Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, post the Mogen Avraham, you put in the shiur and you do the 7 circuits because that's also part of the mitzvah. But the things around the finger, that's leave it for later. Well, it doesn't address it. In the Siddur, he says about the Seder, after you put on the shalosh, then you do the ones around the finger. But now here you have, there's a series of 8 Sforim called Even HaShoyam, which is taken from the Kisvi Arizal and put them in a order of the Shulchan Aruch. So this is from that Sefer. The order of putting on the tefillin, this is from the Shara HaKavonos, from the Arizal. First put on the shiur on your arm, and then cover your arm with the talus, so that the Hanochas tefillin should be discreet. And if you remember, I've said this before, how I saw Reb Sadia Liberov pulling down his sleeve over his tefillin, shiur, before putting on the shalosh. And in the Sefer Ashkafta the Rebbe, Rav Rivkin Alav Shalom writes the same about the Rebbe Rashab in his time. And then he says, after you wrap the 7 around the arm, then you put the shalosh. And then, once the shalosh is in place, oz yitain kiddushin, shehu soid krichas ha'artzuas sviva etzba ha'emsoi ha'nikra amo. Then you put on the tefillin, you wrap around, it's like an act of kiddushin. And as you know, many people have got the minute to say the pasuk be'irastich li la'olam, be'irastich li b'tzedek of mishpat, v'chesed v'rachmim be'irastich li be'emunah, the word be'irastich 3 times. Although Chabad we don't say it, okay. You know, as everyone said about the animamis, under the zogan of big label, whatever, something to that effect. Because we don't say it doesn't mean we don't relate to it. We don't say the pasuk be'irastich, but it's the Indian is true. So now here is a bit more detail. After you put in the shalosh, shuhu ba'alo. The shalosh is considered like the husband. And then he gives the yitin lo habal kiddushin. The husband gives the wife the kiddushin, and that is putting the ring, the straps around the finger. That's like the husband giving the kiddushin ring to the wife. Yeah. So that's what I have for you tonight, and I'm going to finish with that. I wish you an inspiring Lag Beimer, and Gedaihu Rashbi. This Mechalov Shas Chag. We are in the Shas Chag with Afhom de Geula, the Meher of Omein Mamish.
Omein.